A few weeks ago, for my birthday, Morena and I walked across Collserola. That's the big natural park just outside Barcelona. We took the way of St. James, you might know it as the Camino de Santiago, across the hills from the outskirts of Barcelona all the way to Sant Cugat, where we had lunch and then caught the train back. It's a nice walk. I've done it before a few times. About 12 kilometers with the uphill at the beginning, so you get it out of the way before walking downhill for the last couple of hours into Sant Cugat. The Collserola area is known, among other things, for its wild boars, which sometimes come down to feast on garbage in neighborhoods like Sarrià. We've seen boars there a couple of times, but this time we didn't see any. We just had a nice walk. Suddenly, a couple of days later, the wild boars of Collserola took over the Spanish news. There had been an outbreak of peste porcina africana, also known as La Pepa, because of the PPA acronym. In English, this is apparently the African swine fever, a virus that is transmitted among pigs and boars, and that kills almost all that come down with it. The swine fever outbreak happened in an area called Bellaterra, which is just outside Sant Cugat. A few boars were found dead. The people who do boar autopsies determined it was the deadly swine fever, and panic ensued. Within hours, the authorities had closed Collserola and were trying to convince people not to visit nature anywhere in a 20-kilometer radius from the site of the outbreak. Of course, Collserola is also populated in some places, as is the area around it, so keeping people completely out of nature is impossible. But in theory, activities like hiking and biking were and are prohibited. Picnickers may be fined. There's a Spanish proverb about this: no se pueden poner puertas al campo. It refers to the futility of trying to prohibit things that everyone's going to do anyway. But poner puertas al campo is exactly, literally, what the government is trying to do. Anything to contain the swine fever. Hey everybody, it's Daniel. Welcome back to Spain to Go, the best podcast in the entire multiverse for all things Spain. This is episode 126. Let's call it Swine Fever Emergency. I've got a couple of shout-outs today to people I have met here in Barcelona, fans of the podcast I have met here in Barcelona. First, a shout-out to Toby, or Tobias. Toby is into humanizing business, so if you are a CEO or, an HR person who is interested in humanizing your business, get in touch with me. I'll put you in touch with Toby. Also, a shout out to Iranis. Iranis is an artist living here in Barcelona. She's got an exhibition in the Born area. I went to the opening the other night. Maybe you could just follow her on Instagram if you're interested. Iranis, that is Irannis. Irannis. She is Venezuelan, I believe, and she's living here in Barcelona. And as a fan of the Spain to Go podcast, she just reached out to me and asked me to come to the opening, and I did. I do enjoy meeting people here in Barcelona. Most of the people who listen to this podcast are in the US. But if you are in Barcelona or elsewhere in Spain, please let me know, and I would be happy to meet up if possible. I'm in Barcelona most of the time, but in a few days I will also be in Valencia, and I travel within Spain when I can. Anyway, it's really nice to meet people. So hit me up on Instagram or email or whatever, or you could donate to the cause. expatmadrid.com/donate is the donation page. That will take you right to a place where you can donate anywhere from €3 on up to however much you want. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. expatmadrid.com/donate. Back to the swine fever. Pork is a big industry here in Spain, and it's also culturally important. Just look at the name of Spain's premier expat lifestyle blog, for example. It's called The Chorizo Chronicles. So if a deadly swine fever gets around, it could cause serious economic damage. First, because all the pigs die or have to be sacrificed to stop the spread. And second, because export markets don't want to buy the meat. According to El País, just Japan buys 15,000 tons of Catalan pork every month, so plenty of jobs are at stake as well. The swine fever virus can live in pork meat for months or years, depending on the product, so it's difficult to control if you've got forests full of wild boars and a lot of tainted pork coming into the country. I would assume that most farmers aren't feeding pork to their animals, but boars walk around and eat whatever they find. More about that in a bit. So the big question, should we worry about the swine fever? Apparently, la peste porcina isn't a problem for human beings. Also, I once saw a documentary about pork farming in the EU that gave me the impression that every pig in Europe gets a ton of free health care, so the meat seems to be clean. I think that documentary was broadcast on the occasion of an outbreak of swine flu, possibly the one in 2009. The swine flu, as opposed to the swine fever, is sometimes transmitted to humans. But so far nobody is suggesting we need to worry about our own health in the case of African swine fever. Even the meat of infected pigs should be okay to eat for humans. The problem is that it can be transmitted from pig to pig through meat, feces, or ticks. Then why close the natural parks to people? Well, they're saying that people can carry it on their clothes or shoes and spread it among boars that way. Don't walk from town to town petting every boar you see, and you probably won't cause any problems. So far, there have only been 16 cases of swine fever discovered, and we're a few weeks in. The whole thing might be under control, or not. I'll write an update if anything interesting happens. The million-dollar question in all of this is, where did the swine fever come from? Because it hasn't been in Spain for over 3 decades. The swine fever occasionally has outbreaks in Europe, mostly in the East. But where does it come from? Where did it come from this time? That is what everybody wants to know. In the days after the dead boars were found outside Barcelona, the running hypothesis was that someone had discarded some tainted pork meat in the form of a sandwich, and the boars, always happy for a meal, had eaten it. The bologna sandwich hypothesis, or at least that's what I'm calling it, lasted for about a week, until it came out that the Generalitat de Catalunya also runs labs that study swine fever. Perhaps not coincidentally, the dead boars were found a few hundred meters from a lab that, get this, was doing experiments with swine fever just a couple of weeks ago. My wife Morena used to work in a lab containing various germs and viruses down in Madrid, and she says she's not surprised at all if something got out that way. According to her, the negligence around petri dishes full of bacteria was often shocking. Morena was a PhD student doing some complex thing in nanotechnology when we met. She soon got out of that, and now she's in the corporate world. Anyway, she has an insight into what happens inside these science labs for that reason. She says the security at these places is not as high as one would hope. On the other hand, the swine fever lab outside Barcelona claims that there is no scientific evidence that the virus escaped from their facility, but it looks more than a little bit suspicious. The Catalan government has ordered a fully independent investigation to get to the bottom of the whole thing. I guess they're going to try to match the DNA sequence of the virus found in these wild boars with the virus that they were experimenting on. If it is a different virus entirely, then maybe it's a coincidence. But I find it difficult to believe that these boars just died accidentally 100 meters from a lab where they're doing swine fever experiments. Call me cynical, call me a conspiracy theorist if you want. Personally, I'm sick to death of unaccountable bureaucrats living on my tax money while simultaneously being grossly incompetent. But that's only partially related to this story. Anyway, according to the people most likely responsible for the swine fever outbreak, it could be just a coincidence that the whole thing happened exactly where it did. Or maybe there was sabotage at the lab. Or it could all be the fault of a tainted bologna sandwich. That's about all I've got for today. Thank you very much for listening. I have a couple of postscripts here, which you might find interesting. First, hunters have been saying that there's overpopulation among wild boars for years now. But the leftist parties that run things tend to be unfriendly to country people as a matter of principle. And the animal rights types are also against the idea of just letting hunters thin out boar populations. The article in El País I linked to earlier says that the Generalitat now wants to cut the wild boar population in half. So we'll see what happens there. Second postscript. As far as I know, the urban forest parks are still open, so you can do my 7 Hills walk if you would like. I talked about that in episode 88. Apparently some people are calling Barcelona the city of 7 hills. And I went one morning and I walked up all 7. It was a long but not particularly intense hike, and you could also just do the first 2 or 3 and call it a day if you wanted. That is episode 88. By the way, the restrictions on going to nature in theory end tomorrow night at midnight. But if you're in town, maybe Google around to find out what's what. They found a few new cases of swine fever the other day, and I'm not sure if they're thinking about extending the restrictions. Anyway, the urban parks are open. I also have an episode you might like that is called Barcelona Like a Local. That's episode 6, and I think it is the most popular episode of this podcast that I have ever made. Started this podcast about 5 years ago. I was speaking very slowly and in a monotone the whole time. I'm still speaking slowly and in somewhat of a monotone, but I think I've improved a bit, so if you listen to episode 6 and find me boring, I apologize. Anyway, episode 6, Barcelona Like a Local, has some ideas of what you can do to have a more authentic experience. You know how I value authenticity around here. Final postscript today. Sant Cugat, incidentally, where this all happened pretty much, is the birthplace of the singer Rosalia. I have said from time to time that Rosalia is the most influential Catalan person in history. But I'm just kidding. It turns out the Borgia family of popes from back in the Italian Renaissance were from the area around Valencia and are therefore canonically Catalan. They were pretty influential as well for a few generations. I'm going to be going to Valencia in a few days, as I said, and I'm hoping to find time for a day trip to Xàtiva, which is the town where the Borgia family was established. I really know almost nothing about this, except that Niccolò Machiavelli viewed Caesar Borgia, one of the, more important princes in the Borgia line, as sort of an ideal politician. Machiavelli's book, The Prince, was based in part on Caesar Borgia. I'm going to stop talking before I make a huge mess of history, because I haven't read The Prince in about 10 years, but that's the kind of thing, sort of ruthless ambition that Machiavelli talks about in the book, and it's what the Borgia family was known for. Up until very recently, I just assumed that the Borgias were Italian, but it turns out that they're Catalan, so we're going to find out if I have time to visit the Borgia Museum in the town of Xàtiva. I'll let you know. It could be an interesting historical tidbit. Thanks to everybody for listening. Please head over to expatmadrid.com/donate for your chance to support the cause here. expatmadrid.com/donate. Anything you want to send helps. I appreciate it. You could also check out Learn Spanish with Daniel over on YouTube. I've got quite a few videos over there teaching various aspects of the Spanish language. I also make some videos of places that I go in Spain. So check that out, Learn Spanish with Daniel. We are sort of winding down for Christmas here, so I may take a couple of weeks off. As I mentioned in my previous episode about Christmas traditions in Spain, Christmas lasts until the 6th or 7th of January because of the Three Kings, which we're celebrating, on the 6th. So it's kind of a long holiday season. This week, several members of Pedro Sanchez's party have resigned over sexual harassment allegations. It's just the usual thing, Politicians who somehow can't resist sending suggestive photos to female members of their teams. So that's been something of a scandal, but Pedro Sanchez doesn't seem to be ready to back down here. He's just gonna ride out the election cycle until next year, or is it the year after? I can't even remember. Anyway, I dream of doing a special episode someday of Pedro Sanchez resigning in disgrace and maybe even fleeing to some tax haven somewhere, getting plastic surgery and having to live out his life as a beach bum in the Bahamas or something like that. But it's probably not going to happen. Anyway, that's a possibility for an episode in the next few weeks, but rather remote possibility. So if we don't talk in the next couple of weeks, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. Thank you for listening, and hasta la próxima. Bye.